Dear viewers, welcome to today's series Visite and thank you for your valuable inquiries, letters, and of course emails, and also the nice feedback that I get from you. I'll go to an email today, and this email was written by Maria. And Maria writes, I want to read it out briefly. It was 2016 when AIN3 detected. AIN3 is an anal intraepithelial neoplasia that's slightly comparable with a negative pap smear on the cervix, but not on the cervix in this case, but anal, so on the rectum, at the back of the anus. That was 2 years ago. Then there were close checks that were negative. That means there was no cell change. At that time, this neoplasia was diagnosed as part of a tumorous change, operated, removed and then checked. For about the last 3 years, these cell changes are detected again. The proctologist suggested 2 alternatives. One was an analog mapping, so that's called cutting out this cell dysplasia again, or then, they say watch and wait. You write wait and see, so sit it out a bit, wait for the moment, check closely, and we will then set the timing and may have to choose when to operate. And the question you're asking me now is that of course you've been taking various antimalarial drugs, you write and use them here too: grapefruit extract, cistus herb capsules, astragalus, and other dietary supplements with vitamins and so on. The status quo remains. There is no deterioration, but no improvement either. I can understand that quite well. That makes it a bit uneasy, and you are now asking me for my advice. You were born in 1951. Yes, Maria, I would like to answer you. We are talking about a mucous membrane here. A mucous membrane event, and the viruses alone is not the reason. On the one hand, after Koch and Pasteur, we know today that we teach a very strong monomorphism. That is, we see a microorganism, we call it the bacterium, we call it the parasite, we call it the virus, and we then try acting against this activation of a virus or addressing the drama of this viral, bacterial, or parasitic load. There have been great people in the last 100 years who have actually observed that when a corresponding melia also changed, that, for example, streptococci and staphylococci can transform themselves, that even viruses go through a process of transformation, and that the decisive factor is always the prerequisites that are taken in this system, that there is a viral reactivation here with papilloma 16 type in this case. I just want to tell you this at the beginning, because it's not just about being antiviral, it's about understanding the process that has arisen for you. And of course that has to do looking at the organism as a whole. If you always only look at it locally, then you have the surgeon, then you cut away, then you might have chemotherapy or radiation later on, and that doesn't make things any better in my opinion. You have to use the time now and not watch and wait, but must now take the time to understand why this form of viruses are responsible for reactivation here and thus cause this cell dysplasia. And that is a point that of course has to be integrated in order to know how is actually the mucosal health at all. The health of the mucous membranes is the be-all and end-all here, because that is the absolute interface between inside and outside. And the mucous membranes line the body from the inside, but still if I now look at my mouth, throat, esophagus, stomach and the entire intestine with its exit, then there are mucous membranes. They are from above and from below. They have an access and an exit and are therefore open and are a boundary surface for the body, which of course has to make precise decisions, what gets into it. That undergoes a very big control mechanism, and you must and of course you should also know what the mucous membrane immunity is like, what the inflammation of the mucous membrane is like. How is the mucous membrane structured microbially? And nothing at all avoids doing a stool test here, please. There are laboratories in Switzerland, there are laboratories in Germany, less in Switzerland. There is a very large cooperation between Swiss laboratories and German laboratories, and that is very important because of course you get the statement which microorganisms colonize the intestinal mucosa in a very good balance or less good balance because they are responsible for the first defense. The other thing is of course the flammability, silent inflammation. Find out how does the pancreas work, how does the liver work, how do digestive enzymes work together to ensure optimal digestion. So at the moment when the intestine signals to you a very weak mucosal defense, the parameter is the secretory IgA. Then you can assume that the mucosal defenses in the rectum and anal area are restricted. You have control over that, therapeutically. On the other hand, nowadays next to checking for a viral load, I don't want to question the load that has been measured in any way, but you should also look for other loads on a microbial level, and I'm thinking here, for example, of trichomonads, of parasitic loads. Ms. Levendeva has written over 70 books and she is a chemist, but all of the therapists and doctors of the time reported incredible knowledge and case documentation as part of the application of her knowledge in the strategy against a bacterial parasitic load. Whenever you come to these statements, it is of course also important to understand to what extent your own immune performance still has this process somewhere under control or no longer under control at all. It can only come to a viral reactivation and a burden on the viruses as part of a reactivation, but you don't decide that, but it is decided by one's own defense cells. And you have to take incredible care of it right now, measuring the natural killer cell activity. The immune system itself is very broad. There are leukocytes, neutrophilic granulocytes, there are macrophages, there are those dendritic cells, there are the B and T lymphocytes, and there are the natural killer cells. And the natural killer cells, they are simply trained to defend themselves against tumor cells, for example. The natural killer cells are activated by high doses of vitamin D, for example. You say you take vitamin D, but is it high enough? You always have to keep that in mind. We're seeing incredible vitamin D deficiencies in people today, where I say if you then connect the dots, then imbalances simply must arise when there are stresses and the body can't keep up with the reactivation of the natural killer cell activity. Or are the natural killer cells exhausted? If they are still high in numbers, can they still compete enough to be strong in their tumor defenses? At the same time, these natural killer cells don't just clean up right away when it comes to a virus reactivation, but also the natural initiation of apoptosis, of cell death, in tumor cells that develop from it. And there's a test, but I didn't want to say that just yet. Namely, the third function of the natural killer cells is a hinge function, namely between our innate immune system and the adapted immune system. So adapted means that my immune system has been absorbing more and more information over the years and decades and trains its immune system and its classification and specialization on certain viruses within the framework of antibodies. And the natural killer cells have all these key functions. That's why immune status is really important at this position. And then also to see that the natural killer cell activity here somewhere no longer has enough of its own opportunity to act, due to perhaps also its quantitative weakness. The other thing is that of course your blood can also be tested against or for natural killer cell activity as part of a tumor defense. And that's also very interesting because we're doing these natural killer cell tests always because I want to know exactly when a stimulation of this natural killer cells should happen. Then I don't want to play Russian roulette, then I want to know who stimulates them best. And in addition to glutathione, which is an enzyme that influences the intracellular detoxification significantly by example, this is also, for example aspirin, also, for example, curcumin, also, for example, artesunate. There are different active substances, or classes of substances and active substances, against which your blood is measured and the responsiveness of the natural killer cells, which are then specifically activated by 20, 30, 50 or maybe 60%. And you should definitely do this test, so that you can influence it therapeutically. You can't push an immune system, you have to understand an immune system, what harmed it. What happens here on the mucous membranes? Why is there a permanent viral load right here? And I totally agree with you. Of course you can develop a strategy to fight back and operate against it. But if in the organism nothing changes, then tomorrow it will be a different part. And that's why I think it's very nice that you say, what can I do? I can't get any further with this thing alone. The virus stage is of course significantly influenced, also by the content of vitamin C, also by the intracellular zinc content. Please measure this intracellularly in whole blood. High doses of L-lysine stop the virus from multiplying. And on the other hand, it's still important, besides a parasitic load and a stool test and examining your immune defenses, maybe to continue to look at how far along is the toxicity in my body. How clear is the energetic situation in my body? Please look for tooth interference fields. Please check for scars. There is a so-called governor and conception vessel in the meridian flow. It's right in the middle here through our middle and at the back of the back. If there are energetic blockages here, for example through the front teeth or right here a panhandle scar or whatever, then these are things that are very important for a site of action, which maintains a chronic virus reactivated event anally. And at that moment I think it's very important to keep looking, how is my stress on a toxic level? How good is my own detox? And that all has an influence, we know that today, especially toxic loads. And I'm not just talking about aluminum but maybe also about organophosphates, of solvents, of herbicides, pesticides, glyphosate, bisphenol A. These are all things that naturally affect an immune system, which is completely autonomous and independent of our consciousness, of our conscious action. Everything regulates itself. And gently knowing parameters, such as the level of Th1, Th2, Th17, these are very important, also cytokine levels, which we can also implement. In a view of the immune power in your organism, also therapeutically, so that the body can easily cope with such a viral event. And then you really have to look further and, above all, in my opinion, look deeper, to take more into your own hands in that direction instead of thinking, some dietary supplements and high secondary plant protection substances are enough, but really won't be enough in this case. We have at least very good and positive experiences with these routes. And please just remember that other viral events such as herpes zoster or the eternal, recurring, maybe cold sores, that has a problem right here, which lies in the area of the immune system and not the herpes virus. Herpes viruses, of course, need their own cell receptor. Herpes viruses always localize to specific cells. That's why you see the shingles viruses, which are formerly the herpes viruses, which also cause shingles, respectively, who caused the chickenpox as a child or adolescent. This immunological memory remains, but shingles can only become active if you come into a situation where you are stressed, whether this is physical now through a lack of some things or through a high toxic load, a constant other bacterial or parasitic load, but of course also psychologically. And here, too, the appeal to you again, to understand things from a completely different way again. Is there something that has stressed you mentally very deep for many years, a conflict that is difficult to resolve or whatever, and really get help and deal with the issue that has naturally manifested locally? With a certain calm, but with a certain prudence and foresight. I think that's allowed to slowly stabilize again in some form. Yes, with that in mind, I may now be coming to the end of this Visite broadcast and get to my health rule 3. And that's when we started to think about what actually is a healthy diet. And my advice would be health rule number 3, everything that is talked about a lot, that is also well packaged on the shelf and that says it's particularly good for your health. These are all companies, they also need to write it. What is healthy is not packaged, has hardly any degree of processing and is usually sold loose. That might give you something to think about, and I just want to mention, as an example, the good margarine that was used at the beginning of the 20th century and essentially displaced butter for quite a while. But you couldn't do much with butter either. So that has retained a high degree of naturalness, and nothing is as good as good butter. But the margarine, which of course is then ultimately produced from a vegetable oil only through chemical processes, has to be colored, it has to be emulsified so that it can be spread, it must not become rancid, and so on. That's only thanks to a path that still ends up integrating trans fatty acids, which have a highly inflammatory and very toxic effect on our heart health. So you have to correct all that slowly. Clarify it so slowly, and you don't have to keep reading and listening to it and internalizing it, that everything is so much healthier. You just don't do that. And yes, you should also consider that at the moment when you think about it, what is actually healthy, or how should I eat healthy? With this in mind, thank you for your attention, and I am really looking forward to our next reunion, then maybe in the next week or for another Visite show. Thank you for your letters to Visite at QS24.TV, and I'm really looking forward to the next time. Goodbye.